Hello everybody, welcome to the first week of the Policymaking and Rule Governance course. Let's start from the basics on rules and rule governance. So let's look at the individual terms of this lexical compound. Rule comes from the Latin regula, that means straight, stick, bar, ruler, and then figuratively can be imagined in terms of a pattern, of a model. And the word is related to regere, to rule, straighten. Instead, govern comes from the Latin gubernare, that means to govern, direct, rule, guide, but originally in the sense of to steer, to pilot, which is a nautical term borrowed by the Greeks. And this term, kibernan, is the root of the word cybernetics that we utilize today. These two terms, they have a kind of different connotation. Rules refer to something which is a medium. We utilize them in order to straighten, to normalize things. While govern means what I'm doing for things. So I'm governing in order to navigate towards a certain direction. So you could say that talking about rules means to refer to the means, while to govern refers rather to the end. There are two possible interpretations of the rule governance lexical compound. So we can govern a social system by using rules, but also we need to govern rules, because rules, as I said, they can be seen as means, as resources, and then we need to manage those resources. And here we consider that in the sense of system of norms, or also normative system. More specifically, we can say that the content of this course is about informational aspects of systematic approaches to governance by means of rules in business and public administrations. Another distinction that we need to do is that we utilize the term governance not in the general sense, but to focus on the rational aspects of governing. So we can confront that against the meaning of politics. So we need to decide upon a common policy that is going to bind the decisions or the choices of the members of a group, but we are not considering the problem of aggregating the preferences of a certain collectivity. So the endpoint towards which we should govern to. In other words, it's like we have decided where to go, and from the moment in which we have decided where to go, then how to do that. That's what we are looking at. In general, common policies is an essential ingredient for any collective agency, where with agency we consider the appearance of being as an agent. An agent is an entity that acts in an environment, and if we take this consideration, even if an organization it's not properly said a living animal, still we can recognize that it appears from external point of view to behave as an agent. In general, no organization can exist without rules, because rules are needed both internally, because we have certain common patterns of protocol to interact with each other, but also because these rules externally provide the organization a way to be predictable for the others. The term governance is also used in the BPM literature, and here business governance is defined as the process, organizational function, set of techniques, and systematic approach for creating and deploying policies and business rules into day-to-day business operation. This creating, deploying, and applying policy and business rules, we will call this operationalization. That is creating operation, building operations for some purpose. Notice that we utilize the word business, but all what we will say that is coming from this literature is not constrained to the private sector. So what are the functions of rules? The first function that everybody can recognize is to accumulate knowledge. We have experiences while living, and we write down that to guide conduct in the future. So we know it's wrong to go too fast while we are turning on the road. So we shouldn't do that. And also rules set out relevant criteria or collection for information, so that we can also decrease the amount of mistake. So for instance, I know if I recognize what makes a turn to be particularly dangerous, and then I should keep attention on that. The second function of rule is consistency, because rules makes behaviors more predictable, so reduce conflict. And also, they limit the discretion of the decision maker in treating specific persons, groups, and organizations in a different way. A third function of rules is legitimacy, because the decision maker can and should refer to rules to justify their decision. They are taking a certain decision based on what was already been decided before. And then rules can be seen as a support to democracy, because they enable a greater public involvement than just making a decision, because everything is clear. So the rules of the country, they are written explicitly. But I have to also put a disclaimer: they are not sufficient. even the Nazi Germany had a state with right, because there was a legal system operating there. So there is a distinction between state with right, which is a legal functioning system, and the state of right, which is a legal functioning system that is applying universal rights. The themes that we will cover by this course are rules with respect to human beings, so as mental objects, as reasons for choices, as objects of discourse. And also the fact that rules and institutions are source of predictability of social interactions, which is fundamental to have properly organized social life. We will also look at the topic of argumentation backed by rules and at the evidence information patterns that exist in the application of rules. Finally, we will dedicate some time on the rule enforcement, so the punishment and reward enforcement systems. If we look particularly at the information sphere, then we can recognize the rules can be seen as information objects because they need to be communicated so they can be written down and made explicit. We may have information about rule-governed behavior in the sense of a reason that is provided during an argumentation, so why I behaved in a certain way. That was the point of legitimacy, for instance. In terms of evidence, how a certain behavior have occurred. In terms of provenance, so that's about where the source of this content is coming. And in terms of formal acts, artifacts that are produced by actors which are empowered to do so by following established procedures. And then we will also talk about rules about information processing, collecting, gathering, storing, deleting, sharing, aggregating, presenting. These are, for instance, covered by the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. This was all very theoretical, but then in practice what you will learn into this course, well, you will have a general overview of the problems of designing from given rules. The first phase of this design coincides with the interpretation. You need to understand individual rules. You need to integrate them into a system of rules. You need to also to identify who are the addressees and the perspective on rules. The second step is the implementation of rules. You need to think about a workflow of services and the related information structure. You need also to decide how to design compliance and enforcement systems. And finally, you need to decide how to evaluate whether your workflow is working or not, so whether able to implement rules as you interpret them.